today we have Delegate John Cardin, who's going to describe Maryland's newly elected election law, which went into effect on July 1st. Jennifer Bevan-Dangel, who will take us through some of the nuts and bolts of voting, including absentee ballots and electronic poll books. Rebecca Wilson will talk about online voter registration. And Adam Lioz will address the issue of same-day registration. I think we're going to start off with Delegate Cardin.
Thank you very much, Myrna, and thank you, Susan, for the invitation to be here in Arundel County and to be with the League of Women Voters. It's a great honor, and I've gotten a chance to get to a number of different leagues, chapters across the state, and it's always a pleasure because you have some of the most informed citizens and some of the best questions and thoughts, and so I look forward to this because hopefully you will challenge me. I also want to apologize to my fellow panelists because I may step on some of your toes when I talk about the major bill that passed, because it will incorporate same-day registration, it will incorporate online ballot marking and things that I'm sure that Rebecca and Adam and Jen are going to want to talk about. But I'll give you the opportunity to correct all the mistakes that I made. So, so that's I guess the trade-off there. So again, thank you very much. Let me start off by telling you that I come at this as the chairman of the Election Law Subcommittee in the House. There really isn't an Election Law Subcommittee chair in the Senate. There's somebody who works on that legislation, but it's not a specific committee. And therefore, while I have 181 experts in election law, all of the elected officials in the House of Delegates and in the Senate, because everybody thinks they're an expert in getting elected, which they are. But I'd like to believe that I just have maybe a tiny bit more information than most do, maybe with the exception of like a Jamie Raskin or something like that, that I have a little bit more information and sort of background knowledge. So when I was appointed the chairman, I took it as a opportunity to look at philosophically at this position as something that where you look at creating the most open, fair, free, transparent, safe, and convenient elections possible for every person who should be guaranteed and is guaranteed the right to vote. It's every citizen of the state whose right to vote has not been taken away from them. And you know, the last two adjectives I used were safe and convenient, and that's what this bill that was passed this last year really dealt with: safety and convenience. Convenience meaning everybody should be able to vote. We should not dissuade or disenfranchise people simply because they don't have the ability to get to the polling place. Safe, we want to make sure that we are not somehow making our voting process something that can be exploited, taken advantage of, manipulated by malicious people or predatory people that want to try to change the vote from what the intention of the intent is. The essence of the United States of America is that this is an experiment in democracy, freedom to be able to express ourselves. And the most basic freedom and right that we have is the freedom to express yourself politically. That also goes to campaign finance, which we deal with. I don't think we're going to talk about campaign finance here. I would be happy to spend hours talking about campaign finance because I believe that we need to figure out a way to get this whole system worked out. But that's not for today. That's for a different discussion. And also voter ID. And I'll start off my formal comments now that we're done the introduction, with voter ID. The Shelby case that came out, some of you may be familiar with it, the Supreme Court case that came out this year. Was it this year or late last year? This year, which basically changed and really took away all of the restrictions on states that were required to pre-qualify in terms of how they are creating their election processes, their districts for voting, how the Voter Rights Act of 1965 required these states, because they demonstrated discriminatory practices in how they disenfranchised particularly minority and black voters. They were required to undergo certain pre-qualifications in terms of setting up their voting systems. Jen can go into a little bit more detail. I'm sure Adam can go into a little more detail on that. I'll leave it there. The Shelby case basically pulled all that back and said, we no longer have to do that. At the same, and the example that I give, which again, I hope you ask me questions on, is that after that decision, all 5, correct me if I'm wrong, all 5 states have introduced legislation on voter ID requiring more onerous identification requirements. That is absolutely contrary to the idea of making elections more convenient for people. And there has not been an established demonstration of significant or any type of voter fraud that can be solved through voter ID. That's not to say that there's not voter fraud out there. That is to say that showing an ID at the polling place solves one type of ID fraud, and that is in-person impersonation. That is the only type of fraud that it can stop. And until somebody shows me that there is a problem with people going to the polling place and trying to be somebody that they're not, I don't believe that you can demonstrate that there's a problem there. So Maryland has gone the other direction. Now, into the bill. The bill that it was the governor's bill that basically did 3 things. I will take credit for one of those 3 pieces of the bill. Number 1, allows people to register to vote during early voting days. I'll take credit for that because it was my idea. Jamie Rask and I came up with it late night in a bar, actually one night, when we were just talking about how to get around the constitutional amendment issue. And I suggested it, and Jamie said, I can't see any reason why that wouldn't work. And so we put it in, and the governor decided to hijack it. More power to us, we got it passed, so let the governor take it if he wants to. Number 2 is that we increase the number or the ability for local jurisdictions to be able to have additional polling places during early voting. There's a balance there between the cost of early voting, which is a high cost, and the convenience and the ability to allow people to be able to vote. And that is something that, as on the Ways and Means Committee, we deal with election law, we also deal with budgets. And I am proud to say that I consider myself very much a fiscal watchdog in that we don't want to be spending money unnecessarily. The question is the balance worth, is it worth the squeeze? And the answer, in my estimation for this, with this absolute right that we discussed earlier in my earlier part about why I look forward to being the chairman of election law, is because this is a good investment in giving people the opportunity to express their preferences and stay within the franchise. And number 3 is another interesting issue which has political ramifications, which is an online ballot marking device. Now, not only can people register to vote online, can they request a ballot online, but they can also fill out that ballot online. They cannot send it in online. You can't send in your ballot online because there are all kinds of issues dealing with security and dealing with privacy, both. If you send it in online, we're not ready for that. We're far from ready for that. But you can fill it out online using a special computer program, print it out, and mail it in. And that creates a lot of efficiencies that not only save a tremendous amount of money back in the state board or the local boards of election in terms of the arguments. Hopefully Rebecca will give the argument on the other side about how it doesn't save money. The arguments that in the testimony was that it saved a lot of money there, and it also ensures that when somebody fills out that ballot that they're doing it correctly because they can read it. It's actually, instead of being handwritten, instead of being filled out with dots. It's filled out right on the screen in typewritten, and you can read it, you can make sure, then you can print it out, you look at it, you make sure it's right, and then you mail it in. There are some issues with that, which, do you want me to go into those issues, or not you go into those issues?
Go ahead.
I'll just mention them quickly, and then Rebecca can talk. The way that this ballot is then going to be counted is they take that ballot and they actually recreate it on the State Board of Elections special paper, so it can be read by a computer through a computer system. What's it called? An omniscan reader, optical scan reader. The way they recreate it is through a barcode. So there's a barcode at the bottom, which has all the information that's in the on the ballot, and they scan that barcode and it recreates this new ballot. Presumably, it's going to be exactly like the ballot that they sent in, that they already checked and made sure. Initially, that's all they had to do was have a barcode that associated with it. And as part in requiring for security purposes and requiring that it all was going to be made so that there's no manipulation, because you could have a different barcode that sends out a different ballot. Instead of voting for Kerry, it's voting for Bush. Or instead of voting for Romney, it's voting for Obama, or whatever it is. And so they are required to actually do a scan, physical, actual scan by a human being from one to the other to make sure that the one that was sent in is the same as the one that was printed out. They're required to do that. Will they do it? We don't know. But they're required to do it in the state board. So the question is, are we saving money? Because the amount of labor that's involved in this is really a question. It's another question. They claim they're going to be saving money. I don't think that they're trying to waste our money. They want to use the money for as many purposes as they can, and so I don't see how they would testify that they're saving money if they're not. The other issue that you have is a privacy issue. And I'm looking forward to hearing, I'm trying to do this from an objective standpoint. I'm not saying that so the privacy issue. So once you have these two different ballots, you have to make sure that nobody's name is on them, because you can't release the information about who the voter is. So once they get it in, and that barcode has the person's identification information, but that's not printed on the other ballot, because just in case there needs to be a review or a recount, you need to make sure that you maintain that information, but it can't be known to the person reviewing the ballot. So all these technical issues. I will stop. I've already gone on way, way too long, but I will stop with this, that we live in a rapidly changing world. I am running, I'm just a little political announcement, I'm running for Attorney General. There's no secret about that. Much of my platform is based on the fact, and not just on election law, but on lots of things, that we are living in a very, very quickly changing world. The issues that we deal with today, we had no idea that they were even going to exist 25 years ago. 25 years ago, there was no such thing as Windows. Not those Windows. I'm talking about Windows like the program. The Mac was still this huge monstrosity. The Apple II computer was still being used. The issues that our young people, that our old people, that our families, that our children, that our schools, that our advocates are all facing are very different. And we need somebody who's going to think about trying to stay 2 steps ahead of the issues with the law, keeping the law up to date. I believe I can do that. I believe I've shown not just that we're doing that and we're trying to in the election law world, but that there are issues that need to be talked about. And we need to have conversations and put it all on the table and say, it's not perfect. There are issues that I just put out there. I agree with much of it. I disagree with some. But in the end, I think we came up with a pretty good bill that actually does 3 really good things. That's not to say that it's not perfect and we don't have issues that we're going to be dealing with over the next generation of election machines and voting machines and paper trails, and trying to bring together the issues of the blind and deaf and other disabled folks, and balancing that out for privacy. They don't care about privacy, or they care about privacy. They don't care about security. The security folks don't really care about privacy as much as they, or the ADA as much as they do about making sure that it's secure and that there's no manipulation or fraudulent code put into the machines. So trying to bring all that together, the fact of the matter is that we need to have this on the table and continue to move forward in using technology to our advantage, because it's not going away. Thank you all very much.
Let's change the order a little bit, since we just talked about online voter registration. Why don't you go ahead, Rebecca, now, and then we'll go on with the rest of the program, okay?
Okay. I was actually going to take a very different tack, so
Okay.
I'm glad that John brought a lot of the details into there. But I'd just like to start from a slightly different point. How many of you remember the 2000 presidential election? Raise your hand. Remember it vividly. Can you close your eyes for just a minute and tell me what you were feeling in the days and weeks after that election as the election results were being determined? So just yell out what you're feeling.
Complete and utter disgust.
Any others?
Frustration.
Others?
Anarchy.
Disillusionment, outrage. I've heard a lot of things. And that's what it feels like when our democratic processes don't work. And as Myrna mentioned, that election spawned a lot of changes in the technologies that we use to vote. So I'd just like to kind of look at remembering that democracy is when every eligible voter has an equal voice in choosing how we will be governed. That's what we need to measure every technological change against. So let's fast forward 6 years from the 2000 presidential election in Florida, where there was an open congressional seat that was very hotly contested. As a matter of fact, it was the seat that was being left by Catherine Harris, who had presided over that 2000 election. And one of the candidates was very strongly favored to win in the polls by double digits. But on election day, when the votes were counted, that candidate came in less than 400 votes short of the other candidate. That congressional district spanned several counties, and most of those counties voted the way 2/3 of Americans vote. They mark a paper ballot and it's counted by an optical scanner. But one county, which happened to be the most populous county in that congressional district, Sarasota County, voted on paperless electronic voting machines, very similar to the ones we use in Maryland. When those votes were examined, it turned out that about 14% of voters in Sarasota County had not been able to register any vote at all in that race. When that was compared to the other counties that voted on paper, or even voters in Sarasota County that had voted on paper through absentee voting, the rate was more like, it was a more normal rate of, and remember, this was one of the main contests people wanted to vote on in that election. It was more like 2%. So the gentleman who had received less than 400 votes more than the favored candidate went to Congress, and Congress sent in congressional investigators, computer scientists, to forensically examine the machines and find out why those votes hadn't been recorded. And these were top experts, and I've heard talks by some of them, and they were unable to find any evidence to show what had happened. And that is also true in Maryland. If that happened to us, that's exactly where we would be. The other counties in that district were able to be recounted, but there's no way to recount missing votes on an electronic voting machine. So you be the judge. Did Florida improve its elections from 2000 to 2006 by moving to paperless voting machines? Okay. No, they made it worse because you could actually recount punch cards. So That and many other similar disasters in other states prompted many states to abandon paperless electronic voting, and Maryland was one of those. And Delegate Cardin and his colleagues in the General Assembly in 2007 unanimously voted to abandon our paperless touchscreen voting machines, and we were supposed to, by 2010, have in place an optical scan voting system. A little bit different from the ones that were used in back in the old days, because these would have also accessible machines that would allow disabled voters to vote independently, to mark a paper ballot independently. But otherwise, the same technology that has proven to be not only extremely cost-effective, but also the fastest way to vote. So one of the reasons why Maryland has the third longest lines in the nation is because we use these paperless voting machines, because they limit the number of people that can vote at the same time. But you may have noticed that we have not abandoned those machines, and we are still voting on them, even though it's way past 2010. At this point, although most of the other states that switched in less than a year, Maryland, we were told by our State Board of Elections that it will be at least 2016 before we'll have our new voting system in place. And that's only if it's funded this year in this year's General Assembly session. So as we add new technologies to our voting systems, I think it's important to measure them against that ideal. Does this actually make it possible for every voter to have every eligible voter to have an equal voice in choosing how we will be governed? And so with that in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about the new online voting services that Maryland is using, and also the changes to our absentee voting system on which these are built. So Maryland now has no excuse absentee voting. That means anyone can opt to receive an absentee ballot for any reason. And this is a very popular option in the western states. Washington and Oregon vote entirely by mail, and California and Colorado also have a large percentage of voters who vote by mail. But they do it a little differently than we do it in Maryland. They examine the handwritten signature of every ballot on every ballot they receive and compare it to all of the records, all the copies of that voter's signature that they've received in the past, to make sure that the person who mailed in the ballot was the voter. Why do they do this? They understand that when you're mailing ballots out, they don't treat ballots as a controlled substance. They know that a lot of those ballots will not reach their intended target. So they know that if authenticating the voter at the front end is not as effective as authenticating the ballots that are returned by those voters. And so there's very sophisticated technology now, similar to what is used for facial recognition software, that can really determine whether this signature matches that signature. And Maryland is moving increasingly to vote by mail, and we have also made it possible for special elections to be held entirely by mail. So Maryland has no process for examining voters' handwritten signatures. With that, on that basis, we have also made it possible for voters to register online or change their registration online, as John said, and also to request an absentee ballot online, to have that ballot delivered to an email address, and even to mark that ballot online. Now these are touted as highly convenient to voters, and they have been popular in the 2010 election, the absentee ballot delivery, when it was offered. And it is mandated by federal law for military and overseas voters. However, when they did it in 2010, when a voter downloads their ballot and marks it and mails it in, there's a few problems there. That ballot cannot be scanned by an optical scanner. It has to be translated on or transferred onto a paper ballot that can go through an optical scanner. And that's what Delegate Cardin was talking about earlier. And that necessitated a lot of hand work in copying each vote from the ballot the voter mailed in onto the ballot that could go through the optical scanner. The obvious solution would be to count those ballots by hand, but that was not considered. And so Maryland came up with a very elaborate system to transcribe those ballots at great cost. And then the cost savings that Delegate Cardin was referring to come from, instead of them having to hand translate that ballot, they can now automatically translate that ballot, but they still have to hand check it. So they think they might save 5 minutes a ballot, but that's their guess, and their estimate has never been actually tested to find out if that's true. But there's still a lot of handwork involved in comparing those ballots, which is the only way to know whether what the voter mailed in. Let's say the voter decides to mark a race. After they've printed out the ballot, they do a little bit more research and they go, I think I'd like to vote in that race after I left it blank. And they mark it. That's not going to be in the barcode that they receive. So that ballot is not going to match the ballot that's printed out by the machine. There are many other situations where that might happen. All of these services use the same website to access them. And how does that website know that the person who's interacting with it is the authorized voter? Well, when the services were first launched last summer, and this applies to voter registration or changing a voter registration, it required that the voter have a driver's license, and that driver's license number was typed in to authenticate the transaction in place of the voter's signature, which is not possible online. What the State Board of Elections did not know, although it's widely known to many others, is that the Maryland driver's license number is simply a code for your full name and the month and day of your birth. And what that means is that anyone who can take the public information about your voter registration and merge it with your driver's license number, and by the way, if you don't know somebody's driver's license number, there's a website you can go online and look it up. And it works according to a formula, and it's very easy to calculate somebody's driver's license number. So it'd be very easy for a clever programmer to write, I'm told by programmers, 10 lines of code that would take a public database, for example, the online voter registration database that is available from the State Board of Elections for $125, and merge that with the formula that calculates the driver's license using the information in that database. You could selectively target voters. Let's say you were trying to manipulate a primary election where there's very low voter turnout, and you know who those voters are because the state voter registration database tells you the voting history of every voter. You can target voters who've never voted in a primary election in their life, and all of a sudden they voted, and nobody's going to be any the wiser because they're not going to show up at the polls and find out that they've already voted. So this same interface allows you to request an absentee ballot for a voter, and you can fill out that absentee ballot. You can have it delivered to an email address that would be set up just for that purpose. If you're a hacker, you know how to do this. You mail it in, and you have to sign it, but nobody ever checks that signature. So there's no way to know if the voter mailed it in or not. Now, when this was brought to the attention of the State Board of Elections, they poo-pooed it. They did not think that this was a serious problem, even though I and some computer scientists carefully explained to them that some of the attacks that might be possible would be, say, to change the registration address of targeted voters. You walk into the polling place to vote, and you're told, well, you're not registered in this polling place, and they look you up in the statewide voter reg database, and they find out you don't live in Anne Arundel County, you live in Frederick County. So you have two choices. You can vote here and vote provisional ballot, in which case the only races on that ballot that will be counted will be the races that would have been on your ballot in Frederick County mostly statewide races or statewide ballot questions. Or you can drive to Frederick County if you can get there before the polls close, and you can vote a regular ballot, but you will only be able to vote for the things on that ballot. So this is one of the many kinds of attacks that could happen. The State Board of Elections said, well, first of all, we don't see a problem because we've been using the driver's license as an authenticator for all these years and we've never had a problem. And second of all, who would do that? Well, right at that time, there was an election going on in Massachusetts, a primary election, where somebody in the election office, it turned out, was changing voters' registration, was changing the party affiliation of voters. They didn't have the electronic systems. They were doing it, you know, by having an insider attack, which is also possible, of course. And also at the same time, unbeknownst to me until much later, there was an attack going on a primary election in Florida. It actually was going on several primary elections. An FBI investigation has turned up at least 3 probable targets of that attack, although they have not been able to arrest anyone. In that case, the absentee ballots were being requested online. They mail them to the voter. They aren't delivered online. So there's human intervention there where they have to actually mail it to the voter. And they noticed that a lot of requests were coming in from the same IP address or computer address. And so they flagged those as suspicious. They blocked out that IP address. And here comes more from a different IP address. So they blocked that IP address. And here comes more. And this time it's from an IP address in London. And they blocked that one, and this time it's from an IP address in India. So they contacted all the affected voters and found out that none of those voters had in fact requested absentee ballots. In that case, the attackers were stupid and unprofessional and didn't know how to block their IP address. But most hackers do. What the State Board of Elections fails to understand is that the world of the internet is fundamentally different from the world of the paper-based system that they're used to. And you can't just translate what you could do on paper and just put it up online and have it work the same way. And what's really you know, the difference is not only in the scale of the attack, where you can affect tens of thousands of voters with a single bit of code, 10 lines of code, say, and it can be done from anywhere in the world, far outside the jurisdiction of Maryland or U.S. law, and that the chances of a clever attacker ever being caught, or even that the attack will be discovered, are very slim. The General Assembly, especially Delegate Cardin, sorry. I'm thinking that. Did take the threat seriously, thank goodness, because the State Board of Elections did not. And neither did their Senate colleagues. But in the House of Delegates, under Delegate Cardin's wise leadership, they added some safeguards to the law to make it more difficult. Unfortunately, these safeguards are far from foolproof. So they can stall us up a little bit, and I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail. I don't want to go into it now. But it's still an unknown how effective that is. There are also many privacy concerns.
Could you wind it up so we can go with our other panelists and then we can have some...
Okay, I am winding it up. So
Okay.
yes. There are also many privacy concerns with these online services, and there is no evidence that they actually are accessible to disabled voters. I spent an hour on the phone with a blind voter who was never able to get in to modify his voter registration. And worst of all, these systems have never been adequately tested by real computer security experts. And this law, this bill, waived the requirement that they ever meet the same kinds of rigorous security testing and certification that we apply to all of our other voting equipment. So why are we rushing forward with these new technologies that have not been proven to be safe? Let's just step back a minute and think about how it feels when we can't know if our election results are legitimate. And remember that every bit of new technology that we introduce needs to be judged against the standard. Does it make it possible for every legitimate voter to have an equal voice in choosing how we'll be governed? Thank you.
Jennifer, you want to go over the nuts and bolts now, or things that haven't been covered?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a good framework for some of the pieces I'm going to talk about, because you can see that there is two huge considerations, and Delegate Cardin summarized them well. There's the convenience, the ability for everyone to vote in the way that's most convenient for them, that has to be cautioned and safeguarded against the security to make sure that every vote is recorded and registered the way it was cast. And in the light of so many attacks on the voter ID, with voter ID and all these other efforts to try to limit the access to voting, it is good to see Maryland moving forward, but it's so important that we've got also the voices to ensure the security at the table. And it's an interesting thing, when you pick up your cell phone and you place a call, you never really think, well, how on earth did that work? And maybe there is someone in this room who could explain it, but I certainly couldn't. That's right, and who's listening in. Voting is very much the same way. We go and we vote and we just feel mission accomplished, and there's so much work that goes in on the back end for that mission accomplished feeling to make it really true. Is anyone here a volunteer at the precincts, or has anyone here ever been a poll watcher or poll judge? There's one wonderful thing with the league. There's so many people who are the real experts in the field. So some of the specific pieces I was asked to talk about are how that back end works, and how some of these new modifications are going to interact with that back end side. One of the key pieces that came out of the HAVA bill, the federal government's push to move the system in a more verifiable way, was this electronic poll book. And the was something called the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. What ERIC aims to do is create a more national network among all of our different databases so that the different states can make sure they have the most up-to-date information. And this would really help, if all the states would participate, getting this verifiable data would really help with the concerns about that are driving the voter ID laws, where people are saying we need to know who is on our poll books, and we need to know who is voting, and all these voter fraud, the in-person voter fraud issues that were mentioned. Maryland, as well as 6 other states, because there's 7 total, has been a real leader in pushing ERIC forward. And how ERIC works is it starts to create this database where you can access the most up-to-date information on deceased records, people moving records, if you update your post office address. So that, say someone moves from Maryland to Florida, which often happens, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, they decide to live in Florida for the rest of their life, and eventually they die in Florida. Because Florida is not part of ERIC, there's no responsibility in Florida's end to let Maryland know that this voter, who maybe never changed their voter registration, maybe they didn't really like Florida politics, they never registered to vote there, they never came off of our polls for whatever reason. There's no responsibility for Florida to tell us, oh, by the way, Sally Jones has passed away, you need to take her off your voter file. And what ERIC would do would give Maryland the ability to check through those files, the deceased files, to find out that, oh, Sally Jones passed away, let's clean her off of our list. So when you hear about all these questions about the names being wrong on our lists or dead people being on our lists, they're not actually that all these dead people are voting or that all these incorrect names are voting twice, but it's that we have a database that isn't up to speed. And I work for a small nonprofit, I handle our database, and our database is a mess. And I can guarantee you it saves time, it saves money, and it saves an awful lot of headaches when you have good working data. And it's just as true for the State Board of Elections. So ERIC is one piece that's moving forward. As I said, there's 7 states total. Virginia is and Delaware are both in ERIC, which is wonderful. We can get their information. Pennsylvania is not yet. Washington, D.C. is not yet. So when you start to think, where do a lot of our residents move to? Like, who would it be really good to be able to talk to in this way? Some of the key states we don't have as part of this network, but it's growing. So that's a place where we're seeing the technology help move things forward. Another piece that ERIC can eventually help do is find out who the unregistered voters are. And I don't know that any of the states are using this potential yet, but it is out there. About 25% of legitimate resident citizens in America are not registered to vote. And so getting them registered is a huge goal. Because ERIC would also talk to other databases that would help identify who's out there that isn't registered, this could create tools for the state to help target, send postcards. Say, hey, you're not registered. Today's National Register to Vote Day. Go online if it's secure, or come to the MVA and get registered. Be part of our democracy. So that's a tool that's not been used yet, but has quite a lot of potential for expanding who's participating in our democracy. In Maryland, I think we've talked a lot about the absentee ballot process, which I was asked to discuss. But we have taken huge steps that are making it easier to figure out who that 25% of unregistered voters are and give them the ability to register. Maryland is one of the leading states to do motor voter. Who here, has ever updated your voter information when you updated your driver's license? And it's almost shocking to think that there are states that don't participate in that. But by linking the two, here's a place that almost everybody goes. Even, my mother doesn't drive, but she still has her non-driver identification. Even she goes down and registers. So it's a nice way to find these people and capture them. We, under, I believe Senator Raskin's leadership, we expanded our ability to register voters down to the age of 16. I registered when I was in high school. So it wasn't even something you thought about. And a lot of studies have shown that the earlier you register and get involved in democracy, the more likely you are to stay involved and to stay committed. And look at me now, I do democracy for a full-time job. So clearly it's working at least a little bit.
Sample size one.
That's right, sample size one, if I'm any judge of this. And so being able to register online was the next step. And here you get into the convenience versus the security. But by giving people these online portals, today's National Register to Vote Day, we put it out on Facebook. Maybe in a perfect world, someone saw our fabulous, rousing Facebook post and said, my goodness, I should go register. And they can sit right there and they can go and they can register. How do you get people engaged? How do you get them involved? The absentee ballot process is another place where there is potential to get people engaged who wouldn't be able to otherwise participate. Certainly with our troops, with our residents living overseas, being able to go online and say, I need an absentee ballot is invaluable. There's no way they're going to fly back, even with all the early voting days that we now have. There's no way you're going to fly back. So the absentee expands it. The state bill, by expanding absentee to actually this was done previously, I apologize. In a previous administration, we've expanded absentee so anyone can do it. It's called no-fault absentee. You don't have to go on hands and knees and say, please, state board, I swear I'm going to be out of town, or, I'm pregnant, I might have a baby. You don't have to go and beg to do absentee. You're allowed to go online and request your absentee ballot. And that does make it a lot easier for people. The early voting is another piece where it's expanding the access. I ended up having to fly out of town on right for the election last year. You do need to know, with the absentee, you need to know about a week notice to get the absentee ballot requested on time. I found out after that week notice was passed, and I was able to go vote early. So you can do absentee, you can do early. It's the convenience factor. It's getting people where they are. How does all of this communicate? And here's where the technology has to struggle to keep up. If you have people who voted absentee or requested absentee, you had someone who voted early, how many people here did vote early? I should raise my hand too. So quite a significant, and how many people waited in horrendous lines to vote early for that privilege, the convenience of voting early. Of course, we waited 3 hours for that convenience. And as you saw, if you went and voted early, the polling center was not where you go on election day. And this is where being able to provide convenience, the technology almost starts to have to scramble to keep up. And it was a little bit of a mystery to me until I dug into the legislation this year, how you even make this happen. Because it used to be that you had these big 3-ring binders, and you would go to register, you would go on voting day, and they would look you up and down and they find your name in that 3-ring binder. By moving everything online, it's called an electronic poll book, or e-poll book, the sexy short name for it. So the electronic poll books are the technology that's really made a lot of these changes possible. It connects into the online, it connects into the absentee, and it connects into all these early voting centers. Something that I work on with Carol Ann is redistricting. When you think about it, when you think about Arundel County, we have 4 congressional districts that cut through here. We have, I won't even guess, but I want to say 5 or 6 different state districts that cut through here. You might have also an even more hyper-local race. So if I live in Crofton and I went and voted early, around the corner in Odenton, I was in a different congressional district, I was in a different state legislative district, I was in a different county district when I voted. And the e-poll book means that the poll officiant can find you and can connect you with the right ballot. Because you might live, just because you live in the county, you could live in any number of sub-derivations of what your ballot ends up having to look like when you get down to all these local races. And so by having all this online, we're able to expand the early voting, allow people to go vote outside of their home precinct, and yet make sure that I got the right ballot, which I know I did, and make sure that once I voted, my mother couldn't sneak in and say she was me and go vote, because it's already logged in that e-poll book that I voted. The e-poll book doesn't collect how I voted, because that's the privacy concern. That has to be separate. But the e-poll book will show that I voted. And I have a friend who had the unfortunate situation where his father, who has the same name except senior versus junior, and they both live in the same precinct, and his father voted early and carelessly, so here's a case of voter fraud, carelessly actually did vote for his son, and then his son was out of luck because, so that is the trick, is the technology keeping up enough? And the chance of having 2 of these exact same named individuals, and yes, they should have done more due diligence at the polling center, but it shows that there are still things that can happen, but because of the e-poll, they were able to say, well, you've already voted, and he hadn't, but it shows that you couldn't intentionally say, well, I'm going to go to every single early voting site, and as long as I drive fast enough, I'll get to vote 6 times, no one will know the difference. With the e-poll books, they'll know immediately. I won't talk about the same-day registration because you're going to dig into that. But I hope that what people come out of here thinking about is the role that technology plays in expanding the franchise and the safeguards we need to put in place to make sure that those 2 concerns that have been so clearly discussed are balanced. Technology has advanced more in the last 30 years than in the previous 2,000. When you think about that, you realize how fast this technology is moving forward and how fast we have to work to keep up. Look at the latest release of the Apple iPhone, where they had the latest technology, which it can scan your fingerprint. So people like me with young children, they take your phone, maybe they can figure out your password. Luckily mine aren't old enough yet, but they wouldn't have your fingerprint, so they still wouldn't be able to get into your phone. And Apple swore left, right, and center, it's totally secure. Nothing can go wrong. The fingerprint coding is kept in such a different part of the phone, you could never get it. Well, it took about a week, it's been a week since the release, and someone in Europe has already said, hacked it, done it. So the technology is moving, and we do have to keep up. But because the technology is moving, we have to keep up on the convenience side too. Colorado was one of the few states this year that, like Maryland, expanded the franchise and moved forward the franchise. And they passed a bill that they've been developing for, I believe, 10 years. And the premise of the bill was vote anywhere, anyway. You like to vote in person at the local board of elections, there's going to be an option for you to do that. You like to vote online, there'll be an option for you to do that. You want to vote by mail, we'll have an option for you to do that. And it was a very drastic overhaul of their system to say that however you want to engage in your democracy, you're going to have that option. Because it's such a fundamental right and it's such a fundamental responsibility in our society that as government, it's our job to make it as easy for you as possible. And that's the types of reforms that we do need to be pushing forward. We need to be making sure that everyone has the ability to go and vote. I'm a great example. I've got 2 little kids, I work a full-time job, I had to fly out of town. I mean, if there hadn't been early voting, I wouldn't have been able to vote. So you can see how different people have very different pressures, and the thought of that voting day being a national holiday and everyone being able to go and vote, it's just not a reality. So we have to keep up with the modern needs for convenience while we're also making sure that the security is part of the evolution alongside everything else. So just very quickly, I see a few challenges in the year ahead, and you're all here, so you're all engaged. League of Women Voter members really are the most engaged people out there. So I want you to leave here, obviously you'll hear from Adam, but I just want you to leave here thinking about a couple key things you're going to hear about next legislative session. The first is the OptiScan machines. As Rebecca mentioned, we're currently using these touch screen machines, which everyone feels really good because you go in and you see this, modern technology at work. But the state, they're not secure, they aren't safe enough, and they're breaking down. So we either pay a lot of money to buy new, expensive, not safe machines, or we pay money to switch back to more secure paper scan. And this is the year that we'll decide that. We have to fund the OptiScan voting software this year, or, we should just accept that we're never going to make it happen. So I hope that everyone here will help keep an eye on that. And then look out, because in 2016, you'll be one of the few people going to vote who doesn't have this horrified reaction, because we are going to have to do a lot of education. People go and they expect to see those machines now, and when people go in and get handed a Scantron and think they're back in taking their high school exams, there's going to be quite a lot of shock and awe. So we'll also need you helping explain to people, no, this was a good step forward, even though it's different. Another piece that I think we will see is signature verification, because we're going to see an increasing move to vote by mail, and we're going to see an increasing need for these different ways to access. And we can't let that move forward without the signature verification in place. And I think we will see a lot of discussion around that next session. And the last thing that wasn't really mentioned, because it's such a sleeper in the bill ended up including 3 or 4 different studies, because there were so many questions that came out of our last election. Why did I wait 3 hours to vote early voting? Is this new OptiScan, how do we make sure that the new OptiScan technology is equally accessible to all communities, including disabled communities? How do we ensure it's safe? So there's several studies that are happening this summer and fall, and will probably be part of the discussion next session. And it'll be very interesting to see how the studies come out and what types of policy reforms are part of that. So those are the 3 big things that are on the horizon, and I hope that, especially living right here and being so able to go down and participate even beyond voting in our democracy, we live in as an Annapolis native, we live in the best part of the state. So I hope that everyone will be looking for that this session.
Adam, same-day registration.
Absolutely. Hi everybody, so my name is Adam Lioz, and I'm an attorney with DEMOS. DEMOS is a national public policy organization working for an America where everyone has an equal say in our democracy and an equal chance in our economy. And obviously we're here to talk about the democracy part, but we see these issues as very deeply interrelated. And the stalled economic mobility and opportunity that we see in our country is very much related to the problems that we have with people not having an equal voice and equal say in our democracy. So I want to say, first of all, a big thank you to the League for inviting me here. I work across a range of voting issues at DEMOS, and have also been working on these issues for almost 15 years. I had a chance to work very closely with the League's lead lobbyist, Lloyd Leonard, to help pass the Help America Vote Act, although there were some problems with it, so at the end we weren't all on the same page about all of it, but Lloyd was, I gotta tell you, just a first-rate advocate. He is one of the most respected lobbyists on democracy issues in Washington, D.C., and I can tell you that firsthand, so it's an honor to be here. Also, I should mention that Delegate Cardin has mentioned to me that he probably has to leave in the middle of my speech, and so I do not consider that rude. I also do a lot of work at DEMOS on the motor voter law that we were just talking about, and helping to implement that law throughout the country. There's another section of that law beyond the DMV that most people don't know about, which is that if you go to a public assistance agency, so for example you're on Medicaid, or if you go to a food stamp office, you're also required to be given the chance to register to vote. And unfortunately, a lot of states do not do that adequately, and so we work to enforce that provision, ideally cooperatively, but sometimes through the courts when necessary. So I'm happy to answer questions about that as well, because on this National Voter Registration Day, happy National Voter Registration Day, by the way, I call it the Junior Voting Rights Act because it was passed in 1993, and since then it's had a really positive impact on helping people get into the process, and it's mostly unknown to people beyond the motor voter provision. So, but I am here to talk about same-day voter registration. So I think I'm here to go from threat to opportunity and from nitty-gritty to sort of big picture here. So what is same-day voter registration? Well, quite simply, it is a process by which you can go and register to vote and vote on the same day. It used to be called election day voter registration because this would always happen on election day. But as you all well know, the concept of early voting has proliferated throughout the states, and so now we call it same-day voter registration because it actually works differently in different places. So sometimes you can still only do it on election day. Sometimes, like here in Maryland, you can actually only do it during the early voting period and not on election day. And as I understand, the next frontier will be to change that here in Maryland, to add election day to that suite of opportunities to be able to vote. Sometimes it goes all through from the early voting period directly through election day. Sometimes there's a gap in between because the voter registration officials want to have some time to get their house in order. Sometimes you can vote at any polling location whatsoever. Sometimes there are specific early vote centers or only places. So like in Maryland, there are centers that you can go to register and vote early. So it works in different ways in different places. But the bottom line is it works. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we at Demos have been promoting same-day voter registration since 2001. It's been one of our signature issues for a long time, and that's because it works. So what most people, we're very familiar with sort of bemoaning low turnout here in the United States compared to other modern democracies. But what most people don't realize is that turnout amongst people who are actually registered to vote is not that bad. So in 2012, 87% of the people who were registered to vote turned out to vote in the presidential election. That's not perfect, but it's certainly not the kind of terrible, apathetic voter registration voter turnout numbers that we're used to hearing about. But here's the problem. As my distinguished panelists mentioned earlier, nearly a quarter of Americans, 51 million eligible Americans out of a total of 222 million. So that's 23% of folks who are eligible to vote are not registered. So there's where the opportunity lies. Now, why is it that people don't register to vote in the US? The number one reason, if you ask them in surveys, is I missed the deadline. Right? People aren't thinking about the election a month plus in advance of the election. It's our sort of the unique pathology of our system that we require people to take an action exactly when they're not thinking about that action, and when they'll be thinking about it later, it's too late to take that action. That is a key problem that we have, and same-day voter registration is the solution. And I can tell you confidently is the solution because the results, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So of states that do have same-day voter registration programs, turnout is 10 percentage points higher than the rest of the country. Not 10%, 10 percentage points. So we're talking about 68% average versus 58% average. That's a big deal. That's a lot more people getting to the polls. 4 of the top 5 states for voter turnout in 2012 were same-day voter registration states. The United States has a particularly mobile population. And mobility, just like voter registration, the gap in voter registration, the sort of lack of voter registration, is not distributed equally across the country. So as most of us know, folks who are younger, folks who are lower income, communities of color, all these communities are less likely than other folks to be registered to vote. They also happen to be more mobile on the average. So 36 million people in the United States changed their residence just in 2011 and 2012. That's a lot of people moving around in one election cycle. And those folks all need to get re-registered or update their voter registration. And so the estimates have been that, for example, same-day voter registration could actually increase youth turnout by 14%, so even more than that 10% premium that we get every day. And then just one example about how it impacts voters of color. In North Carolina, approximately 20% of the population is African American, but 41% of the same-day voter registration users were African American. North Carolina is the one state that just repealed same-day voter registration. I'll leave you to figure out whether those two facts are related. So in addition to boosting turnout, same-day voter registration also solves problems at the polls. So Rebecca was just giving an example of what happens when someone goes in and manipulates your voter registration, and you're no longer registered at the correct address. Well, this happens all the time, regardless of whether there's any ill machinations going on. People show up at the polls and they're not on the list as they expected to be. And that causes a lot of people to not be able to vote. It also causes a lot of delays at the polling places because it takes a lot of time to solve those problems, and it occupies a lot of poll worker attention. Well, same-day voter registration eliminates those problems. You're not registered at the proper address? No problem. Let's get it done right now and you can vote. No problem. So it has a big impact on how smooth things can go at the polls. And then finally, it's cost effective. So Iowa spent less than $40,000 administering same-day voter registration, introducing it to 99 counties. Less than $40,000. So it is an absolutely cost-effective way to increase people's opportunity to vote and to break through the red tape that currently prevents many eligible Americans from accessing their most fundamental right. So I just want to give a sense of the momentum here that we have on this policy. And Maryland is a really great example, thanks to Delegate Cardin and others, of kind of pushing this wave. So the first wave started in the 1970s. So I should say also this is a panel about technology and its impact on voting. So the poll book technology especially makes this easier and more accessible, but it's not necessary for same-day voter registration, as the proof, again, in the pudding that since the 1970s, 3 states have had it, Maine, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Then there was another 3 states in the 1990s. So as of 2001, which is when Demos started working and really heavily promoting same-day voter registration, there were 6 states that have had it. Then we've had steady progress since then. We added Montana in 2005. We added Iowa and North Carolina in 2007. We added DC in 2009. We added California and Connecticut in 2012. We added Colorado and Maryland in 2013. And unfortunately, we lost North Carolina, as I mentioned earlier. But we now have 12 states and the District of Columbia with the same-day voter registration program. So more of a doubling just since 2001, and a real trend in the right direction. So the bottom line, I'm happy to answer other questions, but the bottom line here, I think, is that same-day voter registration is a profound and effective policy with positive momentum in the states. It can be a key feature of a broader voter registration system that really ideally shifts the burden of registering to vote onto the state. So we all interact with the state in dozens of different ways. The DMV is one prominent example. The state usually has all the information that it needs to get us onto the voter registration rolls. There's no reason why citizens should have to take another affirmative step, to dig through some more red tape in order to exercise their most fundamental right. Ideally, we would move to a system where the burden shifts and the default position is that you are registered to vote. And then same-day voter registration can be a key backup mechanism. If you go to the polls and there's a problem with your registration, or somehow you slip through the cracks and you're not on there, you can register and vote on the same day. That's what we're moving towards. But until we get there, and it'll be a little while until we totally get there, that same-day voter registration itself is a great policy with profound impact and with momentum that we plan on doing a lot of advocacy around in the next couple of years. And I think that the one last note is that the forces of voter suppression do know how well it works, and that's why we're also forced to play defense. So the North Carolina law that's been mentioned was a horrible, horrible step backwards, decades backwards in terms of civil rights and voting rights. And the repeal of same-day voter registration was a key component of that law. That is no accident. There will be a tax in other places. There was a tax in Wisconsin. Maine, actually, there was a repeal in the legislature in Maine, and the people overturned that repeal through the citizens' veto process. They would not stand for that repeal. So we have to be vigilant for a tax, but in the meantime, I'd say overall this is a very positive opportunity for us to be moving forward with voting rights.
Since this is the League of Women Voters, we do have to say a word or two about the League of Women Voters stance. You know that we work, one of our main goals is an election system that is equitable, accessible, fiscally responsible, accountable, and enforceable, and that's what we keep in mind with all of these things. Our president from the United States, Elizabeth McNamara, was just here speaking at the University of Maryland Law School. She's going around the country trying to defend these voter suppression laws that have been recently enacted when the National Voting Rights Act was gutted by Section 4 being declared in the Shelby case as null and void. We hope that what's left of the Voting Rights Act will be enforced by Holder, our Attorney General, and we also urge everyone to contact their congressman and tell them that we need to repair the Voting Rights Act. It's extremely important. I want to tell you that we are having a study. We've just finished one study. We decided to continue with the study on the state basis. And the advisability, it's electronic voting and electronic registering becoming more prevalent. One of our studies will be on the advisability of requiring signature verification on absentee ballots, the methods of signature variation and so forth, verification, cost of training and so forth. We are also going to be going into assessment of alternative voting methods. And so you'll be hearing from us. We're going to be discussing this in our leagues, and everyone's welcome to these, to follow this on our website, LWVMD.org. Recently, we adopted some support for a change in Maryland law that would allow any eligible individual to register to vote online and then complete the registration process at the polling place. And that step is necessary because of the system that we have and the necessity for security and verification. We also want to have a Sunday early voting, which we feel with the new state board election books should be available, but there is some balking at the state board saying that it's really a very difficult task to get those voting books ready for the Tuesday election if we have Sunday voting. So that was something that was debated hotly in the legislature this past time, and I'm sure it'll be coming up again. So I want to just say on behalf of how very interesting it has been for me to hear all of your opinions, and these are people that we work with at the legislature.
Thanks, Susan. Now, are there any questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Maggie, you mentioned about how the driver's license wasn't secure and that they tried to make the absentee ballot process more secure in the new legislation, but that it wasn't quite there. What do you mean?
It's a little bit complex, but they decided to require some other forms of authentication that the voter has to enter in addition to their driver's license number. And that included the General Assembly mandated that it include the last 4 digits of the Social Security number and also one other form of identification that would be easily known to the voter but not generally available to the public. And the State Board of Elections decided to make that be the date of issue of the driver's license. There's a huge problem with using a Social Security number as an authenticator. If you think about how many databases are out there that have your Social Security number, especially this sensitive information of the last 4 digits, which is the most personal part of the Social Security number, you know, and how much problem we have with identity theft. If your Social Security number is ever compromised, you can't change it. It's not a PIN that you can change like when you bank online or when you do financial transactions online. If your PIN is compromised, you can change that PIN. But your Social Security number is for life and you don't get to change it. So using the Social Security number as an authenticator for the voter and knowing that information will then be sitting in the State Board of Elections database, voter registration database. The State Board of Elections, on every audit for the past at least decade, has failed their security procedures of the firewalls that they have on their, just on their standard operating procedure of protecting the information that as a state agency they're required to protect. So that's one more way that your personal information could get out there to be stolen for identity theft. And because Social Security information is one of those identifiers that is so heavily traded in on the black market for identity theft, it's actually very available. So any hacker who is determined to hack into our voter registration system could easily buy that information. It puts up maybe a little bit more of a roadblock to prevent a hacker from getting into the system, but it doesn't really secure the system. And so the question is it possible to really secure a system that is on the internet? Many computer security experts will tell you that there is no such thing as a secure system on the internet. We all probably bank online, we do financial transactions online, but those are fundamentally different from the voting process, where any transaction can be verified by both ends. But for something like voting, and I'm talking here about if we went all the way to voting online, for something like voting, once the voter is separated from their vote, there's not supposed to be any way for the voter to be reconnected to that vote. That's one of the fundamentals of our democracy, is the secret ballot. And that prevents intimidation and harassment and vote selling and buying, and all kinds of other problems that come up when our vote is not secret. And so the computer security experts, some of the best people in the world who've really pitted their brains against this problem, have come up empty-handed every time. They say there just is fundamentally no way to secure the existing internet to make it safe for voting.
Any other questions?
I have a problem with the online voting, and my problem happened to be Jesse Ventura. What happens if you have something that comes out 2 or 3 days just before the election that significantly undermines one candidate and is untrue? 2 days before the election, and you have same-day registration, and that can affect, it seems to me, the election, and that troubles me. And I believe there are federal restrictions on running ads of a certain type before an election. You understand what I'm talking about?
There are federal restrictions. There are windows before the election in which certain ads need to be disclosed and whatnot.
Right.
There's First Amendment. You can't dictate the content
Right.
of an ad. So someone could put up a false ad about someone a couple days before the election. I think that's sort of an inherent risk in our democracy. I don't think that same-day voter registration really affects that one way or the other. I mean, that could happen at any point. It could happen right before Election Day, in which case everyone who's going to the polls on Election Day is going to be affected by that. It could happen 5 days before Election Day, in which case some people will have already voted and so will not be the victim of that attack. Some people will vote the next day under the influence of that attack, and some people will vote a few days later after it's been rebutted. But I think that one circumstance doesn't strike me as a reason overall for not giving people as many opportunities to exercise their fundamental rights, when we know from the data that will overall increase participation in our democracy. And I think that's the goal that we all share, is for people to have their voices heard. And so I think that you can always come up with sort of a nightmare scenario about, well, if this happens, that will really, but I think that applies kind of equally across the board, and so it doesn't strike me as a reason not to pursue our best opportunities for inviting people into the process who are eligible to vote.
There's also an effort in Maryland. Delegate Rosenberg has had a bill for several years to provide injunctive relief. If you recall back to a couple elections ago, there were robocalls going out to Prince George's County voters saying, "Don't bother voting, we've won." So that type of voter deceit, currently there's no legal authority to stop it. So you have to wait till election day is over, at which point it's already had its impact, and then you can go sue the people, because it is illegal behavior. The bill is unfortunately not passed through the Senate, but it is a piece of legislation that we work on every year, and hopefully we'll start to get momentum, because these deceitful practices can have tremendously significant impacts, and with technology, they're easier to trace where the calls are coming from or who's responsible. So it is easier to stop them if we have the legal authority.
Bruce?
Well, actually, it's the early voting that's might be affected by what she's talking about, because some information may come out about a candidate, true or false, that's past one or more of the days of the early voting. So I find that is one of the disadvantages of early voting. Stop there on that. And also the biggest disadvantage, I guess, is the cost. I don't suppose there has been, and there probably wouldn't be a very valid way of measuring the cost of early voting. We know it's expensive because you've got to get all this stuff there to vote. The cost of early voting, is it worth it? Is it, or should that money, same money, be spent on getting these 37% of the people that don't get around to registering a little more publicity? I don't know that early voting is worth its cost.
Carolyn?
Yeah, following up on Ruth's comment, personal experience. I stood in line for close to an hour, maybe, to vote early, but that was what was happening. And on election day, my precinct was empty. So I'm wondering, did we just shift the lines? Does anybody have any statistics showing that voter turnout increased? And I'm sorry that our delegate is gone.
I'd like to take that if I could. There have been no studies that have ever shown that early voting increases overall turnout. There are some studies that suggest that it might even slightly lower overall turnout, but it's very hard to measure exactly what causes what. But it categorically has never been shown to increase overall turnout. However, it can make it more convenient for some voters, but that depends on the days and hours which it's offered. So Maryland has traditionally offered early voting from, say, 10 a.m. to, what, 6 p.m. or something? No, it's like 6. So anybody who looks at demographic data about Maryland will quickly discover that more than half of Maryland voters commute to work outside of the county in which they live, that the most common time when voters leave for work is between 7 and 7:30 a.m. So the weekday days of early voting are no more convenient for most voters than election day itself. Any voter who can make it to the polling place during the hours that early voting is open can probably just as easily make it on the Tuesday of the election. I've worked as a chief election judge in Prince George's County since 2004. We have our longest lines first thing in the morning, and it's easy to understand why. Our people come in often wearing the uniforms that tell us what they do for a living. We have nurses, we have UPS drivers, we have mailmen, policemen, firemen. We know that these people have to be at work at a certain time. They can't come in the middle of the day, they're on a shift. And if we want to make early voting actually convenient for voters, we should be starting it at 6 a.m. and we should be ending it at 10 p.m. We don't even have to think about running it through the Sunday before the election. If we can expand the hours long enough. So why don't we? Because it's not convenient for our election officials.
It's costly.
That's why. It would not be any more expensive to do it for those hours.
Sure, I mean, I would just add that, well, first of all, I think as we're separating same-day voter registration from early voting, right? So whether you're going to have early voting, if you're going to have early voting, you should certainly allow people to register during that period.
Yes.
But early voting itself, I think I agree that the devil's in the details to a certain extent, that you have to do it correctly so that you give people the best opportunities. We advocate that should include a weekend day so that people, I think that one of the things that is important to note though is that while it is true that things come up on election day that unexpectedly that prevent people from voting and they wish they had a second chance. B, a lot of people, even people who have relatively restrictive jobs, are able, if they can plan ahead, in a period of a week, they can figure out an hour or two to break away. They may have flexibility, someone can cover a shift. There's all kinds of reasons why providing more opportunity and a bigger window, provided it's done correctly, can really give people more of a chance to exercise their rights. With respect to the cost, I think that overall, my perspective, so obviously it's important to be fiscally responsible, but we are talking about the most fundamental right that we have in our democracy. We're talking about the right upon which everything else is built. And from my perspective, the costs of implementing these programs tend to be rounding errors on the overall budget of the state or the country. So when we talk about costs for making our voting machines safer and more accessible, costs for public financing of campaigns so that our elected officials are not beholden to special interests, these are all in the realm of rounding errors on the things that we spend the vast majority of our money on. And so from my perspective, to be able to, I think it's a smart policy to allocate some extra resources to create a 21st century democracy that invites everyone in. I mean, I was watching, who watched the TV on Election Day last year and saw the lines, all over the place, and what do you think? You think, are we in the wealthiest and most prosperous modern democracy in the world? Or are we somewhere that's back in time 25 years? And I think that we can afford to invest in what it takes to bring everyone into our democracy.
Adam, I'm sorry our elected official is not here because I worked for the legislature years ago at one time when paper backup was too expensive and they wouldn't pay for it. So in a perfect world, yes, but fiscal questions frequently dominate in the real world. And I think money spent on securing our votes is really the money that we want to see spent first. Because if our votes are easily manipulated, if we don't feel secure that our votes are properly counted, that's bottom line. It really is. We can expand the right to vote exponentially, but if the votes aren't secure, what difference does it make?
I haven't had a chance to speak to this issue. So the cost issue was heavily debated in determining how many sites should be added for the counties during early voting. And the bill was a compromise. It was a compromise between the costs and the cost of local jurisdictions and the importance of giving people this convenience and the ability to access our system. And yes, the security is pivotal, but if people can't vote, then there's nothing to even secure. And so much of our conversation around voting boils down to who are we creating a voting system for? And this is the conversation I had time and again when we talked about voter ID laws, and the supporters of voter ID laws say, how hard is it to get to the MVA and get a license? And it's the same type of conversation with, well, how hard is it to get to the polling place on election day? And the problem is that our most vulnerable voters, the people it is hardest to make sure have the access, the people who have historically been denied access, minority populations, the young, increasingly the elderly, those same populations are the ones that tend to need the early voting the most. And that's why the early voting is proving really important. My sister works retail. She works 12-hour days. She's got an hour commute each way. If Tuesday election day is the day she's working, she's out completely. Whereas if she's got early voting options, somewhere in that week she'll be able to vote. And she has told me the only reason she was able to vote last year was because of early voting. It comes down to, are we creating a system that works for the vast majority of people who, sure, I can go get a license, sure, I can go get there on election day, or are we creating a system that's trying to accommodate a diverse democracy that America is? And that's where the early voting really is so critical.
Rebecca, I have a question. In using some sort of identifier, was there any thought that people could set up their own PINs, 4 or 5-digit ones? Each person would.
That's a question you'd have to ask Delegate Cardin. I don't know what other methods were discussed, but I know that that's what they ended up with. But I did want to speak to the cost issue if I could, because I have spent several years pouring through every bit of cost data I could get on our voting system and really analyzing what we're spending. We have so far spent about $150 million on these paperless electronic voting machines that we can't impound. That's since we started buying them in 2002, and that's even with a lot of $60 million, $80 million of federal money also being poured into there. We will see a significant reduction in our cost of voting when we move to paper ballots. And the reason for that is these machines are extremely costly, not just to buy in the first place, but to maintain, to test, to secure, and it takes really highly paid technicians to do a lot of this stuff. So when we move to the optical scan system, we'll be replacing the average of 10 electronic voting machines that are in a polling place with 2 machines. One optical scanner that counts the ballots, and one machine that allows voters who need help marking a paper ballot to actually, mark that ballot and have it scanned. The vast majority of our disabled voters don't actually need any help marking a paper ballot, because the largest category of disabled voters are voters who have mobility issues. So for them, they actually need, that's where we're looking at really what's a better way to help people who have trouble getting to the polls in the first place. For most, in the 10 years that I've been a chief judge in Prince George's County, we have never had a single voter request to use the audio ballot. And the only times it's ever been used is when I've assigned some of my election judges to use it to make sure that we have the equipment operating correctly, because that's the only way we can test it. So I think we often get, if we seriously want to solve our problems of accessibility, I think we really have to understand who, as Jen was saying, who is the voter we're trying to serve? And I think that's the same thing we have to do with early voting. Who is the voter we're trying to serve? Can they actually make it to the poll between 10 and 6 on a weekday? Because if they can't, we're wasting our time having people sit there in an empty polling place. And every time I voted early, I've been the only voter in the precinct.
Can I change direction a little bit to something that Representative Cardin brought up that I think is important, and I didn't think got enough talk. He talked about some of the privacy problems.
Yes.
And I'd like to bring it up because I think privacy in voting is so important, and people don't realize how it was a great innovation that we had in secret ballots, so people couldn't be coerced and bought and sell. And we have to really care about making sure that we still have the privacy in the voting. One reason some people are wary of absentee ballot voting is that it is less private. In the polling place, you're assured privacy. Absentee ballot, your employer might ask you to come in and all vote together. That's happened. Or there could be, in your family, there can be coercion. So people are worried about it. But the new online voting, the new online delivery of ballots and marking of ballots introduces privacy problems that go beyond traditional absentee ballot. Delegate Cardin mentioned one that I was not familiar with and was a bit surprised about. He said that the barcode includes the person who voted.
Yeah.
That would be a
Not
direct,
sure if
I'm not
that's
sure,
true.
but there are 3 things I'd like to have the League of Women Voters think about in terms of privacy for these online ballot. The most fundamental, I think, is that when people are sending in these ballots that they printed off their personal computers, they're sending in one envelope, both their oath and their ballot. And that's different than what we've been doing traditionally. We've developed a system traditionally where we have the ballot sealed inside an envelope so that when the local official is making a decision about whether this voter should vote to count or not, they can't see how the voters voted. They can just see the oath and make sure that it's a registered voter and the signature. And so the sealed envelope prevents bad stuff from happening in the voting place. Now that people are sending back their envelopes, their votes in one envelope, that system's gone by the wayside. So I think that's very, very significant. There are 2 other ways in which the system is less private. One is that people that mark their ballots online are doing it on a personal computer. And even if you don't send the vote in, the personal computer can capture how that person has voted. And so it is a lot less private. It can capture it in many ways. Let's say you're voting on your employer's site, lots of employees like the FDA or whatever have surveillance. And so there's no guarantee that people aren't collecting how people are voting. Same thing in libraries. There was a keylogger in Montgomery County library where they were tracking all the keystrokes on that computer.
A hacker had put
A keylogger. So what you don't want is a situation where people's privacy is violated and data mined and collected, and that could be used for voting coercion. And the third thing I think is important with privacy is, we want voting to be accessible for everyone, but, and definitely in the voting place, there's been huge efforts to make it accessible for everyone and private and independent. But these online ballot marking systems, if at the home, if let's say a blind person uses their computer to do it, they still can't fold up the envelope and stuff it in and do everything privately. So they still really can't vote independently. So I'm concerned about the lack of independence there. So, but my biggest concern is having those two pieces of paper that are associate the person to the vote.
I hadn't thought about that.
That are connected, and a lot of local voting places are opening these envelopes up and preparing for election day before the canvassing board, so both parties aren't there witnessing, and there's really no oversight. And we know through history that bad things have happened, and it's better to prevent it than to be sorry afterwards. Let me tell you how other states deal with this.
All right.
The biggest way other states deal with this is they limit this system to UOCAVA voters, so it's a very small
military
portion
and
of
overseas.
Military and overseas voters. Maryland is the only state, at least it was the only state that opened this system up to all voters. That's a huge difference in risk, just enormous.
Okay, well, I thank the panel. I'm sorry, Delegate Cardin, I had to leave early. Thank you very much for coming. We do appreciate it.